Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Berg. I'm with the State Energy Office, and we are delighted that you have joined us today for our quarterly webinar. It's Opportunities for Future Progress with the Colorado Resiliency Office. And welcome. Next slide, please. So here are the scheduled dates for our next Climate and Future Adaptations webinar series. We've got one coming up July 18th, September 19th, and November 14th. And of course, as always, the recordings and upcoming webinars are available on the website that you see there. It's the Resiliency Office webinar website. Just a point of order, please feel free to use the chat to communicate any questions or comments. And you can use the Q&A to communicate any questions to the panelists only. You are on mute, and during the Q&A, Jemmy will be delighted to unmute you if you'd like to speak. Just please raise your hand. And again, this will be recorded and available after as well, along with the slide deck. The purpose of this series is to give you resources, local governments, tools, and knowledge to address climate change in Colorado. And you're going to hear a lot about funding and opportunities and support from the state and different agencies, and also federal funding today. Education on solutions and actions to address climate change, build awareness of our programs, again, funding opportunities that you may hear some similarities in our pathways to recovery and resiliency funding webinars that you may have attended, and of course, alignment with state climate strategies and goals. Next slide, please. So we've got a jam-packed agenda, as you can see, and I'll do intros as we go through, but this is just sort of a lay of the land. We're going to hear from lots of different folks today, and our first panelist is, next slide, we have the wonderful Mark Silberg, who is our special advisor to the governor on climate and energy with the state. And he's going to go and kind of give you an overview of what's been happening at the state and some of those resources and priorities. All right, Mark, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Christine, and thanks everybody for joining us today. And apologies in advance, I'll have to leave a little early, but my email address is on these slides, and at any point, feel free to reach out and discuss any of the things in these slides or anything else that's on your mind. I wanted to focus my few minutes with you today on some of what I think are the most exciting opportunities for local governments in particular to work with us on implementing policies and programs to help all Coloradans take advantage of the clean energy incentives, rebates, and opportunities at the state, and also contribute to some of our longer term planning around climate mitigation. So on this slide are a couple of immediate opportunities for local and state coordination. The first is a bill that has just gone through the General Assembly. It's House Bill 23-1234. And this establishes $1 million fund for local governments to adopt automated solar permitting technology. So the National Renewable Energy Lab, our neighbors here in Colorado, have developed a platform called Solar App. It helps reduce the install times and permitting process by local governments, whether it's adopted as part of an existing online permitting process, or can be a standalone online permitting tool as well. Their experience having piloted this in parts of the Southwest and in California shows they can instantly process about 80% of typical rooftop solar projects. And given that permitting and other local regulations account for about $7,000 of the total installed cost of solar, having this tool at your disposal both will reduce the cost of solar installs in your jurisdiction and also makes things faster and easier on your staff. And so the Colorado Energy Office will be administering this $1 million program that is for technical assistance so that your folks can get trained up on the tool and also integrate the tool into your existing permitting process, recognizing that every local government and county may have a slightly different approach. So stay tuned for more on that, but definitely a great opportunity to help deploy solar faster in the state. The second is around technical assistance for adopting new building energy codes. And so last year with House Bill 22-1362, there's a statewide energy codes board that is developing model electric ready and solar ready codes. Those will be essentially pre-wiring code requirements on top of the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. And once those codes are adopted at the statewide level between roughly this summer and the summer of 2026, any local government adopting a new building code will have to meet at least these minimum requirements. And so very deliberately, we built in about $4 million of technical assistance funding available to your jurisdictions to help your staff adopt these codes and bring them into your local regulations. And so again, run through the energy office and want to make sure you have the resources and know-how to adopt these codes when they're available. And that same code board will also be developing a modeled low energy and low carbon code by roughly summer 2025, available for adoption after summer 2026. And again, continued resources at that time for code adoption. The last set of grants, which I think nicely complement a number of different federal dollars, which you'll hear about a little bit later. But last year we brought forward about $20 million in funding for electrification and infrastructure improvements at public buildings in particular, and also grants and funds for electric heating and appliances as well. Those two are run through the Energy Office, and the links, as you will get on these slides, are available to you to view those programs and apply for those dollars. Next slide, please. Another exciting piece, which doesn't necessarily directly impact each of you, but will be important to your residents and Coloradans and businesses across the state. House Bill 23-1272 is a new roughly $1 billion clean energy tax credit package that's available statewide. This will help bring down the cost of heat pump technologies, whether it's water or space heating, resources to de-risk and help build out geothermal electricity projects, expanded and extended electric vehicle tax credits, both on the light duty side, starting with $5,000 this summer, as well as on the medium and heavy duty side, a statewide program for $500 off electric bicycles, a new program around advancing sustainable aviation fuels in the state, as well as funding for innovative industrial and manufacturing efficiency and decarbonization projects. So keep your eyes peeled on that as you're thinking about both communicating with your communities around federal incentives and existing state programs. Make sure this is on your list as well so people are aware. And the last thing I'll add, although we'll have much more time later in this discussion to talk about federal opportunities, our office, the governor's office, is here to help. If you're thinking about going after a competitive grant or looking for technical assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and to our office. We're always happy to write letters of support, put you in touch with the right agency if you're interested in getting involved with a statewide program. So just want to make sure you're aware that it is a top priority of us to bring down as many of these federal dollars as possible. And of course, at the end of the day, you and your communities will be the ones to benefit. So with that, I think that's it for me. I will stop and hand it back to Christine. Thanks.
Oh, great. And Mark, you have a slide in here about the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap world tour.
How could I forget? Thank you. Last slide. So speaking about what comes next. So we are in the process of updating our greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap. The first roadmap, which was released in January 2021, has been about 95% accomplished. And so we're thinking about what comes next on a regulatory level, a legislative strategy level, as well as administrative actions we can take. This is a tentative list of some of the in-person and then later virtual events that we'll be hosting for communities to get involved and share input onto what our priority strategies ought to be in the near term. We would really welcome local government participation as well. I think you all have a unique vantage point on where there are opportunities best fit to your community and how local and state partnership can drive deeper emissions reductions as well as adaptation and resilience. So if your community is listed here, please show up. And if not, reach out to us and participate in either one of these or a virtual event. And again, the link there will show you all the details on that process. We're expecting really to have a new roadmap probably by the end of this year. So things are moving quickly. That'll include both the stakeholder engagement side of it, as well as modeling the greenhouse gas, economic, workforce, co-pollutant, and other benefits of the priority strategies we choose to focus on over the remainder of the Polis term. So thank you, Christine. Now I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. And again, if you've got questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. We are delighted to have Marguerite Harden with us from the Colorado Resiliency Office. She's the local resiliency manager. And exciting news, new funding opportunity. It's called the Climate Resilience Challenge Fund. Thanks, Marguerite.
Yeah, thank you, Christine, and thank you for having me. It is really great timing. We just announced this fund, this new fund, this past week. So excited to tell you more about it. And I just dropped the link in the chat for where all of the information I'll be sharing today is stored. This Climate Resilience Challenge is a first of its kind for the state of Colorado, and the purpose is to really increase your community's climate resilience through one, planning, and two, the actual implementation and construction of those plans through both climate mitigation and climate adaptation projects. So here you can see a diagram that really provides a big overview of what climate mitigation is, what climate adaptation is, and that intersection of the two that have those co-benefits of both mitigating and adaptation to climate. Some of the examples of projects are up there, but really something you should walk away with after this talk is that climate mitigation and adaptation should really speak to your community needs. Climate resilience is very community by community focused. There's no one size fits all approach. And so part of this process is really having a strong climate resilience plan that you will be able to implement in order to identify and prioritize your community needs in this realm. So that next slide, I'll provide a little bit more overview for what the funding that is available. So we have $20 million over the next 3 years through June 30th, 2026. And this fund will be opening on June 30th, and there will be about a month-long application period. We will be following the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund, or EIAF, grant program deadlines and rules. And so a lot of local governments are familiar with that fund. It's a really important fund that DOLA runs generally twice, this year it's twice annually. We run an application process for that fund. And this Climate Resilience Challenge is a set aside from that EIAF fund. And so that's why we'll be following those rules. The Climate Resilience Challenge has two major funding opportunities. One is for planning grants, as you see here, and another is for implementation grants, which I will go into more depth. And one of the big takeaways here is EIAF can fund these projects separately through the traditional means of funding. With this set aside, we are really just reducing the match compared to general EIAF funds, and we're increasing the amount of funding set aside for these projects. And so we in the past have run a Renewable and Clean Energy Initiative, or RENEW fund, that focused exclusively on climate mitigation projects. And this fund, again, integrates that climate mitigation with adaptation. And so we are really looking for multi-objective projects here, which I will go into more depth about. But again, a reduced match, just 10% there for planning grants, and a 25% match required for implementation grants. These awards for implementation grants can go up to 5 million. And so with just $20 million over 5 years, there may not be that many projects that we're able to fund. So we're looking for really big, bold projects that really integrate a lot of the needs in your local community. And just as with all other EIAF funds, local governments are required to be the eligible applicant, and local governments are required to get in touch with their DOLA regional manager. And we at the Colorado Resiliency Office will be working hand in hand with the DOLA regional manager to support your community in getting some of the best applications in. So let's go into the next slide, where I'll dive deeper into just the planning grants. So we are looking to support climate resilience plans or climate action plans. And in order to receive funding for a planning grant, your proposal needs to incorporate these three things on this slide. So it needs to touch on climate mitigation, so doing a study of energy and energy use, energy efficiency, how you're going to be integrating clean energy into your region, and really doing that sort of greenhouse gas reporting level. Two, it must incorporate your local climate risks, impacts, and vulnerabilities, including social vulnerabilities. So it needs to consider what climate vulnerabilities you have. Is it floods, wildfires, drought? What are, and you see here this image, what looking into the future climate impacts are you going to be facing in your region? And 3, it needs to take into account climate adaptation solutions. So not just climate mitigation, not just that greenhouse gases, but also the climate adaptation solutions that will ensure those climate impacts are being reduced. And so this can be done through one integrated plan, or your community may already have separate plans for climate mitigation and climate adaptation. We are looking for your proposals to really integrate these in whatever way works for your community. And I have linked here in this slide a Colorado Climate Action Plan overview for some of the non-exhaustive list of communities here in Colorado that already have a climate action plan. Now, generally, a lot of these plans really just do the climate mitigation or the greenhouse gas or the energy planning that is required of this program. We are going to look to support you in also doing that climate adaptation planning through this fund. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll focus now on implementation grants. So these grants are focused on implementing the climate plan that you already have. And so you can take that last slide, those 3 requirements, in order to be eligible for applying to this implementation fund. You already need to have plans within your community that check those marks of mitigation, vulnerabilities, and adaptation. So it's possible that in this first year, we will mostly be funding the climate action planning in the previous slide. And in future years, since this is 3 years worth of funding, we could be funding more of the implementation of those plans. So I encourage you to work with your DOLA regional manager to understand if you have the qualifying plans in order to apply for this program. We want to be flexible. If you have all 3 of those checks of mitigation, adaptation, and risks and vulnerabilities in a comprehensive plan, that could be perfectly qualifying. But we need to see that you have done the future visioning and the prioritization for your local community in this area before we can fund you potentially up to $5 million for these implementation grants. The next bullet here is that we are looking for you to propose a multi-objective project, not just climate mitigation, not just climate adaptation, but really a project that integrates those 2. And I'll provide a little bit more examples of what that means on future slides. We also are going to look for you to incorporate those social vulnerabilities and that inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, or IDEA approach to your communities. So who is most vulnerable in your communities, and how is this project serving them? And again, making sure that you discuss with your DOLA regional manager and the CRO as you develop this project. Let's go to the next slide. So these multi-objective projects or priorities, what we're really looking for is, again, something that integrates those three needs that I highlighted earlier. And we at the state, we have a Colorado resiliency framework that sets 6 priorities for the state as a whole. And you can see in this diagram in the bottom right corner that climate change is underlying all of these sectors and all of these areas that are going to be, climate change is a force multiplier for all of the impacts in these sectors. And so we see affordable housing as really serving a lot of, being integrated into climate change impacts, for example. And we have these 6 priorities at the state level. However, you at your community level might only be related to a few of those. Your local regional plan will delineate what the climate priorities are in your region, and we would look to incorporate projects that hit on those multi-objective priorities. So let's continue on, and I'll dive a little bit deeper onto this advancing of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility through these projects. So we, again, at the state have our own Colorado Enviro Screen tool that we use as one way to look at who is most vulnerable here in the state. You may have a different approach to integrating these projects, but we want to see that you have asked who in your region is most vulnerable to these future climate shocks and stressors, and how do you plan to support them? This is a question that all state funds are really asking for communities to do, and this fund is no exception. So your planning process should identify these communities, whether that's through using the EnviroScreen tool or your own tool, or J40, or so many of the others that are out there. You know, we look to supporting you and those communities in these projects and plans. So this next slide, I'm going to provide a few examples of multi-objective projects, and I'm not going to go too in depth on this first one, the Alta Verde to net zero workforce community that is in Breckenridge, because we are lucky enough, the next speaker will be speaking to this directly. We have someone from Breckenridge joining us. But you know, big picture, this project does integrate energy efficiency, solar PV being that climate mitigation side of things, as well as transit-oriented development, affordable and workforce housing, and green infrastructure on the more social vulnerabilities and climate adaptation side of things. So really great example of a multi-objective project that you'll get to learn about more today. Now, I've also listed here the Poudre River Whitewater Park in Fort Collins as another multi-objective project. It provides recreation and economic development while also reducing flood risk and increasing natural habitat. Now, this project actually does not reduce greenhouse gases in any way, and without knowing too much more about the project, it may not be serving those socially vulnerable communities within Fort Collins. And so those are two things that would need to be integrated into this project for it to be eligible for the Climate Resilience Challenge funding. So this is an example of a really great project with co-benefits, but it would have to go a little bit further just to be able to achieve the funding that we are looking for. So jumping to the next slide. We've lost a slide, but I do have more information that I will drop into the chat that is on resilience hubs and other examples of multi-objective projects. So the Climate Resilience Guidance and Resources Overview that is linked here in the chat provides a lot more inspiration for you to take as you consider what your community needs are and how this fund can meet them. One example is resilience hubs that can serve as a community space, an emergency operations center, while also serving a vulnerable community in your region in partnership with nonprofits or community-led groups, as well as, you know, a resiliency hub could integrate renewables and energy efficiency. So that file provides more information on resiliency hubs, green infrastructure, climate mitigation approaches, wildfire or other natural hazard mitigation approaches, and is a resource for you as you think about those projects in your community that could be used for this proposal process. So with that, I will pass it on to Christine to introduce our next speaker.
Wonderful. And certainly if you have questions, that's an amazing new resource for local government. So Marguerite can certainly help you with that. Yes. So Jessica Burley is with us today. She's going to talk about that amazing Alta Verde project. She works with this town of Breckenridge on sustainability and parking, which is a huge deal there. And you guys have gotten very innovative with your parking for the incredible number of tourists that come to visit your little town. She also serves on the Frisco City Council. So anyways, Jessica, thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about that project today.
No problem. Thank you all for having me and for that good lead-in overview of the new funding that's available, because the projects I'm about ready to talk about were made possible by some of the Renew funding that was sort of the predecessor to that program. So thank you all for having me today. I wanted to start with sort of that high level visioning and one of the reasons why Breckenridge is set up very well in order to potentially go after some of the funding that you're hearing about today. And that is, we have very clear action plans and vision plans related to both housing, sustainability, and climate action. We have a very large commitment by our town council that they refer to as the 5-year blueprint for workforce housing. You can see there on the left, the sustainable BREC plan was just updated in 2022. But that's a decade-old long plan at this point that was just majorly overhauled and gives us a 10-year planning horizon moving forward. And then we were also partners on the Summit Community Climate Action Plan, which was led by our partners at the High Country Conservation Center and is a regional effort, actually. Most of the major jurisdictions here in Summit County are part of that collaborative. And so we all share a very common climate oriented action plan. Well, we share the same plan, but all of those goals have been then integrated across all of our other plans. So I just wanted to start with that to say that going through this exercise and spending the time and effort to do this really gets everyone on the same page. And it's a way to have a conversation with our leadership and our town council, and we can always refer back to that community driven plan or plans as we move forward with this climate mitigation and climate action. So next slide, please. So what we found in doing those exercises, the first thing is that our community has committed to 100% renewable electricity, which we did back in 2017. And that was before the town had a sustainability department, and it was largely a citizen-driven initiative. So we've learned a lot since then, and our goals have both updated and reflected this initial commitment, and then we've built on it with our greenhouse gas reduction goals. Related specifically to building energy, we have a 36% reduction goal by 2050. And then in terms of our housing goals, we would like, and this might seem ridiculous to a lot of you, but in a tourism driven economy, we don't have locals who live locally. We have the workforce often comes in from bedroom communities. And so there's a very strong driving goal behind our housing program to house 47% of our workforce within the community. And that leads to a balance of resident and vacation rentals. And you can see that here, and that's included in the 5-year blueprint for housing. And then related specifically to the Alta Verde project, which did kick off in 2019, that project was intended to be a model for sustainable long-term affordable housing. It was right after we also adopted a sustainable building stretch code, which included the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home program. And so as we were trying to demonstrate to the community that zero energy ready homes was achievable, we said, well, let's take the next step with our workforce housing and try to go all the way in on net zero. And that's what we did with Alta Verde. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges that we have here, and I'll just briefly touch on these related to housing. We do a housing needs assessment every couple of years, and we're in the process of doing another one right now. But the last one indicated that we need 1,400 homes in Breckenridge by this year. Shocking, we're not there. And then 1,300 of them needed to be rentals. So at the time, we were really focusing in on the rental housing stock. We know we need to maintain low rents, affordable housing costs, and healthy communities. We also know that low-income populations have higher exposure to climate-related health hazards and health risks. And based on our climate action plan, we also know that our new construction, as we build out our community, will need to be net zero by 2030 in order to help us achieve our carbon emissions reduction goals. And then the graphs right here, you can just see these are based on our 2020, sorry, now I'm getting the years confused, our 2020 emissions inventory, and we will be doing an emissions inventory every 3 years moving forward as part of our climate collaborative. Next slide. So a little bit more about Alta Verde. We have the original project was committed to one phase. Our council liked where this project was going so much that they committed to a phase 2 before phase 1 was even CO'd. But they do look a little bit different in terms of what need they serve and how they are constructed for resilience and climate adaptation. So phase 1 was based on It was a LIHTC project, and so there was 9% LIHTC financing as part of this, so our AMIs were very low. We had, I think our lowest units are now 30% of all the way up to 60% of the area median income. This was also built on a site that had no deep utilities to it at all, so there was a lot of site work prep. It was also in the floodplain of the Blue River, which if you're familiar with Breckenridge, has historically been decimated and rerouted and really just kind of torn up by the dredge boat mining of the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so there was a lot of work that had to be done out on the site. And so when we were considering what we needed to pull and bring in there, it was an easy choice to go all electric and just say, you know what, we're not going to bother with natural gas here. We're going to really go all in on the electrification piece. And so we also had a design charrette with the developers, and they asked us, well, what does net zero mean to you? And we were really interested in trying to make it all net zero on site. So anything that we needed to offset, we were going to be offsetting with solar PV on the site of the development itself. And so you can see with phase one, it's about 650 kW worth of solar PV. Phase two, we're looking at a little over 1 megawatt of solar PV, and that spread, as you can see in the picture in the background, between the roofs, but also the carport designs that are part of the facility. And just really quickly, phase two here will be 172 units, and the AMI will be more of that middle AMI range between 80 and 120. So that's the biggest difference here between the two phases. Next slide. This is now a little bit outdated, and I don't deal a whole lot in the financing side, so I can try to answer questions, but also refer people to the right folks. But Breckenridge has a dedicated housing tax, and so we have income that is solely dedicated towards improving affordability and workforce housing for our community. So where you see anything that is a loan to the developer, that is coming out of our housing fund, our dedicated housing fund here in Breckenridge. You can see there's a lot of deep utility work, and as well as the LIHTC federal funding for phase one. And then I did call out the net zero portion, which we really looked at the incremental cost to the building envelope and then adding that solar PV system. And this is where I want to call attention to the assistance that we got through the Renew program. The first phase received $650,000 towards that system, and then we applied again in a round just this past year, and we received $750,000 for phase two. So, you know, while our council was really committed to doing net zero, as we looked at what that meant for these sites and how we focused in on that cost differential, it really sold the project to be able to receive this assistance from the state. And so we're really thankful for that. We're really proud that we were able to receive an award a second time for this. And we really think that, you know, being able to make these units net zero will increase the livability and the affordability for the tenants who are actually in that. So it was well worth the investment for us. And again, thank you to DOLA for that funding. Next slide, please. And just a couple more differences related to the energy efficiency piece and how we got to net zero. So as I mentioned, we as a community had just adopted the Zero Energy Ready Home program as our above building code on energy. And so phase one really followed the prescriptive pathway of zero energy ready homes. And then they just looked at the total modeled energy use and offset that with the PV. And then, as I mentioned before, we really, you know, we saved on having to run natural gas to the facility, and all of the units in Alta Verde 1 will have, or not will, they do have in-unit heat pumps. And so a lot of the external units for those heat pumps are all on the roof, and they've really found an interesting symbiotic relationship between the PV and those units being on the roof. Phase 2 was more of a performance-based model. They really wanted to tamp down on the building envelope before looking at what they would have to do to offset with solar PV. And so there was a lot more emphasis on the building envelope and the mechanical systems. And then in the end, it was about double what the solar PV requirement was for Alta Verde 1. Next slide. And this is also a little bit outdated because the net zero portion of Alta Verde 2, which is under construction today. But this was a model that we looked at related to the number of units, the demand charges from Xcel Energy related to having net metering solar, and then also the utility allowance provided by HUD that spoke to the AMI rates and the rental costs per those units. And so you can see here the savings basically on these units in totality for 172 units will be about $144,000 a year. Over 10 years, that's 1.4 million, and over 20, that's 2.8 million. And so that's savings directly to the tenants of this project, and we're really proud to be able to pass that cost savings on to the folks that live there. And just quick note, we have CO'd and have started filling Alta Verde 1. All of the 80 units there are full, and Alta Verde 2, as I mentioned, just broke ground on their vertical construction like 2 weeks ago. So we're really excited to see that project come to fruition as well. And thank you guys for your time, and happy to answer questions when it's appropriate.
Amazing project. And I think, gosh, it'd be great to have tours just to see how that all fits together. You can see how you get pretty creative with funding on projects like this, and looking at, it strikes me with the second phase, it's like you're leaning towards more passive home building, which is pretty exciting. So yes, I'm Christine, and your host today, and I'm going to go through some federal funding opportunities and maybe a little state funding as well. So next slide, please. The one main program with IIJA that doesn't already have due dates, so to speak, is our Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Program. We, of course, this has been during the ARA days. This was a really robust program. The competitive funding for this for local governments that didn't receive formula funding has got a good amount of money in it, but the general purpose of the program is to assist eligible entities to reduce fossil fuel emissions, reduce total energy use, and improve energy efficiency. So next slide, please. The portion that Colorado is getting for us to re-grant out to local governments does have some strings attached. It's just a little over $2 million. It's not a ton of funding. So we're required to give 60% of that funding to local governments that, or Indian tribe units that did not receive direct formula grants. So smaller, by population, smaller counties and municipalities. And this portion, we have realized that a lot of the work that needs to be done, especially you see all this funding coming through, you need staff to help you plan and implement programming. So we have decided that portion will be used for staff capacity, and the remaining 40% we are looking at regional collaboration. So projects where it could be a partnership between counties and cities, it could be regional, it can kind of be whatever you like, but understanding that leveraging those resources can really be beneficial when you're looking at building projects and looking at energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions. A lot of the federal funding has a requirement that 40% must be allocated to just as 40 communities. So if you're one of those communities, actually please reach out to me, because we would like to ensure that you have all the information and that we can support you in applying for this particular program, because almost half of it needs to go to your community. We're hopeful to have program details and application information coming this summer. Next slide. So this is Inflation Reduction Act stuff coming through the Energy Office, just an overview. There's funding for this high efficiency electric home rebate program. So it's the first time that our office is going to be like giving rebates out to residents, which is really pretty cool. Maybe we'll have some more information coming this summer. There's also home energy performance-based whole home rebates, and that is for electric home appliances for low and middle income recipients. And that is also TBD, we're waiting on some guidance from the Department of Energy, and then the Home Energy Efficiency Contractor Training Grant Program. And that is, as you know, there's a huge workforce gap between having all this funding for heat pump installation and all of the things that we need to have installed, and training for contractors are obviously very important. So looking at having some funds for that. So that'll come through our office as well. Next slide, please. Additional programs that you might have heard about. So this is, some of the stuff, the Assistance for Latest and Zero Building Energy Code Adoption, the Environmental Justice Community Block Grant, which is going through the EPA. And I know you're probably having conversations about the climate pollution reduction grants. And what I wanted to mention about that is that there was some funding that came through to Denver and I think the state for planning, and then there will be additional funding coming through for implementation. And it's like, it's not a formula grant, it's a competitive grant, but it's like over $4 billion across the US. And so I wanted to just give you a heads up that we will be doing a lot of stakeholder outreach to local government staff around near-term action items, kind of the priorities that we'll be putting into the roadmap, which will then qualify for that competitive grant. So that's very exciting. It's a lot of money, and we'll be sure to really have conversations, robust conversations around those priorities with local governments. Next slide, please. There's a few things I just wanted to flag. Obviously, there's the 30% tax credit for rooftop and community solar ground source heat pumps, which is amazing. The one that's highlighted is the 30% direct pay for tax exempt organizations, including local governments, for geothermal, solar, and battery storage. This is a game changer. For the first time as a tax exempt municipality or county, you can apply. I've been reading some guidance on this. It looks like you'll have to have enough money in your budget or financing available. You will put that project together, install it, and once it's functional, you can then apply through the IRS for that 30% tax rebate. So that's very exciting. And then of course, there's also some funding for multifamily new construction that meets Energy Star requirements and zero energy ready requirements and affordable housing energy grants. So there's a lot around affordable housing as well. Next slide, please. I just wanted to mention we do have a state geothermal energy grant program. You may be aware one of the governor's initiatives is the Heat Beneath Our Feet, which is really looking at our geothermal resources. And so there's a lot of funding for residential geothermal. And then this is also a complementary program that's also includes community district heating and geothermal electricity generation. So those programs are still in process, but it is certainly the first time this state is giving rebates and grants for geothermal energy. Next slide, please. We do have something called the Clean Air Program. Local governments are eligible. It's subsidized technical assessments to identify greenhouse gas reduction opportunities, voluntary air pollutant reduction project cost coverage. It gets pretty technical, but it's support to really look at industrial manufacturing operations. So that's available as well. And the end goal is to identify and drive air pollutant reductions across the state and assist the state in achieving sector-specific greenhouse gas reduction targets. Next slide, please. Before I turn it over to Jemmy, I wanted to mention, of course, that the Energy Office has grant programs and rebate programs for electric vehicles, fleet transition. So if you haven't, the Energy Office website has all of that information, and certainly there'll be a lot of support for local governments transitioning to the 2021 building codes that Mark mentioned earlier. There's a lot of federal funding coming for technical support for local governments to go above and beyond the 2021 international energy conservation codes as well, looking at net zero or electrification there. Our communities in Colorado that are looking at and have passed all electric requirements for new buildings, both on the residential and commercial side. So that is moving. And I am happy to introduce you to our next speaker, Jemmy Barrera, who is with the Colorado Resiliency Office. She does community engagement and communications specialist, and she's a coordinating goddess. She's going to talk a little bit about state government support for local communities. Thanks, Jemmy.
Thank you for that intro, Christine. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about 3 resources that we have. The first one is the Local Community Funding Guide, which is an ongoing resource. The second is the Local Government Coordination Call, along with the Pathways webinar, which is also an ongoing resource. And the third is the Regional Infrastructure Development Summits, which is occurring this year. So as you can see here on this screenshot, the Local Community Funding Guide was created through the Department of Local Affairs and in collaboration with other state agencies to provide up-to-date information on funding opportunities for local governments and community organizations. This is updated at the beginning of each month and is focused on comprehensive funding for local governments and communities, but has prioritized IIJA and ARPA funding. If you take a look at the top left chart in the corner, you can see that you're able to search by award type. You can also search by category, program name, and eligibility. This was created to make it easier for you to filter through the funding that is a priority to your agency and the projects that you are planning to implement. The pie chart you see on the right illustrates how many opportunities are available in each category. These include categories such as agriculture, energy, water, transportation, etc. And the link for the site will be shared in the chat. We do advise that when you use this guide, you open up a new window. It makes it a lot easier to navigate. So the second opportunity is the resource is a local government coordination calls. And this monthly call is a resource for local governments and is focused on assisting local communities and navigating funding opportunities. These include, but are not limited to, updates related to the American Rescue Plan Act, the Infrastructure Improvements and Jobs Act, as well as other forms of funding that are relevant to the local level. It takes place on the 3rd Wednesday of every month at 11 a.m. Topics vary based on current events, but they always include updates from the Department of Local Affairs. And within this coordination call, we have the Pathways to Recovery and Resiliency Funding webinar series. The goal of this series is to break down state and local funding opportunities to better help local governments and community partners navigate and access potential solutions for the challenges that they face. This series is hosted by the CRO and is also in partnership with OEdit, with collaboration from other state agencies. And the link for this to sign up and register will be linked below too in the chat. And lastly, we have the Regional Infrastructures Development Summits. This is occurring this year, and these were created in collaboration with state agencies, along with Keystone and El Pomar. And this is an opportunity to assist local governments in navigating those IIJA fundings opportunities region by region. These regions are shown on the map above, along with the dates. This is a chance for local governments to match projects to funding opportunities, to apply strategic planning and guidance on successful grant applications. Our first summit will be in Region 3 on May 22nd. The RSVP link for May 22nd and May 23rd will be shared in the chat. The RSVP links for the other regions will be coming soon. But if you're interested in joining that invitation list for these summits, if you want to contact Mary, which is linked in the slide here, with your name, the region, and state specifically in that message that you would like to be added to the invitation list. And also, if you just want to learn more information, the link to the website is on this slide too, and will also be linked in the chat. And I think that's it for me, so I'll hand it off to Christine, who's going to facilitate the Q&A.
I better unmute myself here. Yes, does anyone have any questions, comments? I know there's a lot of timelines, and I'm fully aware that local governments have a lot coming at them. So certainly the local government resource guide is always a great tool to kind of siphon through what is interesting to your communities. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I guess we were very thorough, which is wonderful. Anything else any of our speakers wanted to mention, or any other things? We've got a load of stuff in the chat as well for those different events to engage with our IIJA summits. So yes, lots of exciting opportunities for engagement. All right, well, I think I'll just keep going with the slides. Feel free if you've got any questions, throw them in the chat and we'll definitely address them. Jim, if you want to forward on, I'll talk about the next webinar that's coming up. So we do have the next topic is social equity and community collaboration. I think that's in July. We don't have the date on there. It's from 12 to 1 p.m. And again, you know, as always, it's on our website listed below. So, oh, we did get a question. How are you getting this important information out to every local government and community organization? That is exactly the right question to ask. I'll defer to the Resiliency Office on their strategy, and then we can have other folks comment as well.
Well, I can jump in just around the EIAF fund and especially this Climate Resilience Initiative challenge set aside. We have a really robust network of regional managers, 8 regional managers within DOLA that are boots on the ground within their region and have connections to every local government and understand and really communicate. It is their job to communicate and be a funding navigator and support for those local governments in understanding what their needs are and connecting them to these funding opportunities, whether that's the EIF fund that DOLA runs or it's the other funds that are available. So it is a really leading and sort of tried and true way that you may already be familiar with for us to do this communications and outreach. Otherwise, we do have planning processes within the Colorado Resiliency Office with our rural regions where we also are getting to know their resiliency challenges and solutions and connecting them to funding. I've been the manager for the Resiliency Roadmaps program, working in over 150 rural jurisdictions in the state. And then of course we have just the traditional DOLA social media, press office, and other sort of communications avenues, plus what Jemmy presented on of these local government calls. And so, yeah, you know, we are trying to do that outreach to the communities that are low capacity, building their capacity, as well as just doing the traditional outreach and engagement. Hope that helps.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that question, Janet. And there's actually another one. Considering not everyone has a climate plan, are there any templates for climate adaptation plans for the resilience challenge or examples you can share? So that certainly covers a lot of communities that may not have plans that they've created or that are encompassing those characteristics that you're looking for that grant.
That is a really awesome question. I did have a link that came in the PowerPoint that will be going out to everyone. I can actually drop it in here of just where in Colorado these plans exist. It's really not a template, but it is a good way to look from peer to peer as to who has what climate plans. And you know, you may be neighboring some of those plans if you don't already have a plan. So it could be a good way to kind of look at your peers. But otherwise, I wouldn't say there's a template. The resources guide that I also linked into the chat above does link to a lot of climate action planning resources. ICLEI and others do a lot of this planning support. And it is anecdotally a priority within a climate advisory group that I'm on that's run by Colorado Health Institute, CHI, for the state to be developing a sort of template like that. And so that is something that I do hope to roll out within the next year or two in collaboration with a lot of our partners who are focusing on climate health impacts and other climate impacts. We are also looking at doing this for extreme heat. There's a state interagency group on that is looking at how should a community approach extreme heat and what is that template? And we're working with a really great group of capstone students on that. So the sort of shorter answer is we don't have a template, but there are tons of resources and they're linked there. And I am interested in helping to develop more of those in the period of this opportunity. So thanks for that question.
Sorry, I wanted to mention, I think one of our webinar series, we talked about climate plans. I was just digging around in the resiliency website, but I believe we had 3 different local governments talk about their climate plans. So I'll try to, maybe one of us can dig around looking for it, but we can put that in the chat.
And we did actually host ICLEI for that webinar.
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe we can put that in there. Jessica, did you
also recommend the Mountain Towns 2030 organization for anyone in the who identifies as a mountain town? There is no specific definition or qualification, but that's one of the things that they're working on, as well as trying to put together a framework for climate action and sustainable action plans, so that local governments don't have to do all the brain damage on their own. So mt2030.org is another great resource, and they work beyond Colorado as well, but it's just another opportunity to see what else is out there.
Yeah, Jessica, I put that in the link. It's actually a really great conference, and it's interesting to work and see what is happening in other mountain communities, Utah, Wyoming. It's just really, they keep saying you're so lucky you live in Colorado because we've done so much good work on policy. So and greenhouse gas reductions. So anyways, that's a great event to attend as well if you're interested. Any other questions? And Jen, we wanted to clarify our next webinar will be slated for July 18th. So we'll update the slides to make sure that's in there. Well, we appreciate all of you. And please, if you have suggestions on how you would like to be contacted about things, or ways that would make it easier for you to receive information, always certainly reach out and let us know. But thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you in the next one.